And so I'm Bill Yost. I'm an investment manager at Foresight Group. Foresight is a private equity firm based in London with about £10 billion invested in wind, solar, forestry, and other clean assets. There's also they also manage about £2 billion that is invested into UK and Irish SMEs. I lead investments into early stage tech companies through the Foresight Williams Fund. And we have a very strong ESG component, although we do invest across multiple sectors. Personally, I've been the founder of a few startups and have been either raising or deploying venture capital for the last 20 years, have seen a few exits along the way, and the startup journey is one that I really love. So I'm really pleased to be talking to a couple of entrepreneurs here, and I think climate tech and the technologies and companies that mitigate climate change is something that we should all care about. And so again, it's nice to not only have some entrepreneurs, but people who are potentially building companies that could help to make the world a better place. We are short one attendee, unfortunately. Anna Marie couldn't be with us because of concerns about COVID, but I will let our panelists, Riam and Joe, introduce themselves, please.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming here. So my name is Riam Kanso, and I'm the founder and CEO of something called ConceptionX. We help PhD students commercialize their thesis and build deep tech companies whilst they're still doing their PhDs. So this started in University College London in 2018, but once we've had some good case studies and an exit, it became an independent entity where we now have students from 30 universities building deep technology startups. So our methodology involves leaving them in the universities, in their labs, surrounded by their peers, by the equipment that they need to use, rather than making them stop their degree, which is typically what the mentality behind doing a startup is. I think over the last few years, we've had some really, really interesting case studies in climate tech, clean energy, and especially with the intersection of deep tech, which is where I work. There's quite a lot of hardware in climate tech, and I think it's part of the journey and the funding pathway that we're here to talk about. But anyway, more on that later, I think.
Thank you, Riam. I'm Joe Stevenson. I'm the CEO of a business called Anaphite, which is a battery materials startup in Bristol. My background is in the chemical industry, first in corporate life, and this is my second small business startup. I've spent 25 years commercializing functional materials, very largely in energy and environmental applications.
Great. Well, pleased to have you both here. And Riam, as you mentioned, a lot of climate tech technologies and companies focus on hardware. And it is very challenging raising venture capital for any startup, but particularly startups that want to build and make things. It's much easier to conceive of feeding a bunch of programmers pizza and letting them develop code in a back room than it is to actually build and manufacture things. So I don't know if either of you would want to comment on some of the challenges faced in raising funding for the types of companies that are in this space.
Okay. I guess I'll give a general view, and you can give a much more specific personal view. I think, as you said, it's much easier to let people code and do things. But I think with hardware, there's a lot of, there's an R&D phase required at the beginning where people don't quite know what they're doing. In climate tech, there's money available now for things that want to scale, but at that early stage, there's still some trouble, and good luck, solving climate problems with software only. Like, that's not gonna happen. And I think another challenge is that whilst in other industries, the industry sector is very involved, like in fintech and in software in general and in AI. You have industry contributing a lot to either invest in companies or to do mergers and acquisitions and whatnot. I think with the cutting edge climate tech, there's still a bit of discrepancy in that space where, where are all the companies funding climate companies? I think it's still very much at the cutting edge, so that's an issue. But we're optimistic, so we'll see.
Okay. It's hard to be an entrepreneur and not be optimistic.
Yeah.
Joe?
So my background is entirely in this sector, so I can't compare it with anything else. We start from a good place in that I think people like to invest in things that they can poke and use and possibly even see how they work. So that's a good starting point. A lot of the really transformative technologies are technologies in the old sense, in that is the application of science before you even get to the stage of engineering where you're deploying understood systems. Science is haphazard. It has a high failure rate. Not just commercial failure rate, but technically it's very uncertain. So that makes the early stages difficult. The later stages are also difficult because it takes a long time. There's a huge process of validation, and the scale is enormous. So there's a lot you can do with information technology. We've touched on this earlier today in using less energy or using it in better ways. But in terms of making energy and deploying it at scale, the biggest companies in the world are often energy companies. And you're dealing with assets that have a lifetime of 50 to 100 years typically, a lot of sunk investment. So scaling to the point of maximum impact is a really, really expensive game, and it's beyond the scope of the imagination of most startups.
Andrew, you're particularly in the battery sector, and that is one climate tech sector that has seen some large financing. A few companies come to mind, particularly out of Cambridge. So, for instance, Niabolt, which has just done a very large raise. Are those valuations sustainable and valid at this point? Do you think there's been a bit of hype around some areas of clean tech?
I don't want to be rude about anybody. I think they are sustainable, yes. Batteries it's my sector, and it's an interesting one in that it's rare for a relatively mature technology and industry. So lithium-ion batteries have been commercially deployed for the best part of 40 years. Suddenly an application comes along and the demand grows by 2 orders of magnitude. I mean, you have to go back a long way, probably when Rockefeller got lucky and people stopped using kerosene for lighting and started using it for transport. I mean, it's that level of change. So suddenly, yes, you've got an enormous opportunity. Most aren't like that. They don't happen quite so quickly, and that scale of transformation isn't there. It's usually much more incremental in this world.
Riam, you're much more at the early end of
Super early, earliest.
And are you finding, the previous panel talked about talent and the need for experts, both brought in from overseas and generated domestically. You're working with PhDs in a number of universities. Are you seeing enough activity, I suppose, in the sorts of fields that you think might bear fruit in the next 10 to 20 years? Are there sufficient efforts in clean tech, climate tech research?
So we target scientists and engineers who are doing PhDs, typically working on a piece of technology. And we basically are targeting those who would otherwise work for Google or Amazon. And we try to teach them how to work for themselves ahead of that, in the hope that maybe they'll work for themselves. I think the thing about climate tech is that because of the work that we do, many times people come with an undifferentiated technology, and we have to help them find a use case. So a lot of them are veering towards climate tech now, but the earlier panel was about quantum, and one of our exits was a quantum drug discovery company. But when they joined the program, they were doing quantum and machine learning. It could have been batteries or something similar. So I think there's technology and there's more directing them to do things. But I think we're seeing more and more cases in clean tech because, well, the planet needs it. So,
right.
Yeah.
And the companies that you work with, do you track how they go on to be financed? Are there particular finance vehicles that work well for those very early stage?
Yeah, I think with deep tech in general, the trend I'm seeing at least is that VCs are starting to go earlier and earlier, even compared to 4 years ago. Like now it's about investing in things that otherwise wouldn't have received investment. So we have we've signed a partnership with a VC firm, and they're giving us with XTX Ventures. So one of the speakers is tomorrow, and they're giving us 6 to 12 checks of 100K each to deploy in the companies of our choice, which is typically smaller and earlier than you would do in deep tech, but it's part of the effort to start earlier. And clean energy, clean tech is one of the areas that they're interested in.
And Joe, so venture funding is obviously only one piece of the puzzle when it comes to getting a startup off the ground, and because we all benefit from cleaner technologies, is there more that the government or other or industry or others could be doing to support companies like Anaphite?
So an allusion was made at several levels to that thing. In terms of direct support, there is a lot of support from the UK government. The EU is generous in its support of these areas. So it does make money stretch. Certainly my business has been able to raise money from the markets, but that money has gone further because you can get it match funded effectively by Innovate UK and similar bodies. So there's that level. The thing about climate tech, it benefits all of us, doesn't mean we're prepared to pay for it. And a lot of the benefits are at a global level where actually individually you never would pay for it. So I think what people are sometimes shocked by coming into this area is the customer is very often the government. And I've worked in a market that was entirely created by government and regulation, and our customers, the people who are technically our customers, resented us as a supply chain element because we produce no end user value. The value is all at the societal level. So it was a grudge purchase. The only way of thinking about that business is to think about the government as the customer and the customer as a sort of victim. It's a funny way of thinking about it. But when you're going and you're selling that as an investment prospectus, it looks deeply strange. So the biggest thing the government can do is create the market through regulation. And actually that is more uncertain than the weather. There are lots of really, really painful examples where policy has gone like that and the whole industry.
Well, so as an investor, I would say it's tricky to build an investment case because of it, simply because of regulation. You look at industries where solar has been subsidized and subsidies have disappeared. So you're right, regulation can disappear overnight. I think you were probably talking about emissions on vehicles, which I think we're all happy to have that regulation. And we'd be disappointed if it were to disappear. But the economics of selling clean technology is tricky. I was the founder of a clean tech startup, and the mantra at the time was, being green opens doors to discussions. It was quite easy to meet customers who would say, yes, we'd love to have a solution to this. But it was economics still that closed the deals. So it's you can almost get a false hope in that loads of people want to talk to me. I've got lots of potential customers on my PowerPoint slides when I'm raising, but getting to contracts and recurring revenue is quite another challenge. Yeah. Is there anything more that the government can do? Do you think regulation is simply the answer, or is there? Let's go into the really early stage stuff. Are there incentives that could help to pull technologies out of universities? My firm, we quite like the iCure program that allows PhDs to go, and it funds them to talk to people in the marketplace over a period of several months. Have you had some positive experiences with some of those programs, or is there something you'd like to see if you haven't?
I think, purely from my perspective, understanding the regulatory hurdles of any sector is super valuable. So for our PhD students, like sometimes having one person who actually understands the ins and outs of that helps them a long way, and basically mostly helps them stop making a mistake that would put them a year behind. But with things like solar panels, if you want to install something, you need to get permission, and I think you have more to say.
A cleaner regulatory environment. Yeah. And more understandable. Is there any advice you would give to anyone who was thinking about starting a company in the space?
We'll do it. Understanding that market situation is clearly important. It's valuable advice for anybody. You know, I think the general advice is the same for any startup. There just are some specific things around energy and climate tech, particularly. The structure of that market and the market incentives, being realistic about timescales, and the amount of validation. You know, car design cycles are minimum 6 years. On a truck, it's 10, and that's demonstrated technology. So if you think you're going to make a volume sale in 6 months' time, you're deluding yourself.
Yeah. And you mentioned field life. I mean, technologies in the energy sector have to survive for decades, and as a startup, to prove that your technology is capable of that is a very long and arduous task.
Yeah, and I think one of the it's a source of advantage as well. I mean, if you know how to break your thing and other people don't know, then you can predict its lifetime and degradation mechanisms better than it's part of that technology piece. And I think that is the key bit of advice, is understand what the protectable technical bundle is. It always comes down to, in my area, which is materials, it's always come down to three things. Knowing what works, which means understanding the customer's application, probably the customer's application. Knowing how to make it, and knowing when you've made it. So being able to characterize it properly. Those are all interconnected things, and you should be able to do all of those things better than any of your customers or competitors can. And if you can do that, you've got the potential to have a durable and valuable business.
Any advice you would give?
Well, I think the planet needs it, so the more people who can start clean tech companies, please go ahead. I think there's room for innovation and for competition.
And do you, because you work across a number of universities, have you found value in pooling people from disparate universities or different geographies and putting them together, or are you simply commercializing technology in silos from each?
No, we're cross-university platforms. So I think some of the most exciting things are when PhDs from different labs start working together. And it also highlights the different rules that the universities have for commercializing IP and things like that. But that's another panel.
I think we could have a whole day session on how to improve university commercialization.
Yeah.
But it's, I mean, that cross-disciplinary thing is, so the founders of my business are chemists and a physicist. The next tranche of people we got in were electrochemists, like hen's teeth. Anybody knows an electrochemist, I want their name. Now we're recruiting chemical engineers, and the next lot will be automotive engineers. It's that building of technical capability in these businesses needs to be measured, but you need to be quite deliberate about it, and you need to start looking early for some of these people, in my experience.
And I think, aside from the scarcity of electrochemists, the UK is fairly well positioned across a lot of those disciplines to bring in, you know, a collaborative approach, and people from automotive or old, you know, sort of more mature industries that may be ripe for a change.
Yes, I think that's right. And the UK is well positioned, and we beat ourselves up, particularly in cars. There is still the rump of a car industry in this country, but it's not really enough to sustain and build a really strong supply chain, not like it is in some other European countries. So, yeah, we do rely very heavily, actually, because of that, on the strength in the universities, which is real in this country, in my experience.
Great. Well, do we have time for a question or two?
3 minutes, Bill.
3 minutes. So
I'm
perhaps
the watcher.
Perhaps a question from the audience? Everyone's satisfied with the state of the climate, and
What's the most useful thing that non-startup people can bring to early stage startups in like hardware, especially hardware businesses like climate?
So what, non-startup people, you mean?
Investors, stakeholders, like other companies wanting to work with startups. Like, what are the things that you need the most at the earliest stage?
I think early interest from the established market players is really important. In terms of understanding the markets, understanding needs, understanding what people are prepared to pay for and what they're not prepared to pay for, and having plausible use cases and some way of testing those, whether that's just testing it as an idea or testing it as a product. That's, as I say, my experience is within my own area, but I get the sense that actually that's more important for high-tech systems and components than it is for some of the other sectors that we've been discussing around software.
And perhaps a willingness to pay for the true value of something. If we look at plastics, the synthetic plastics that are made from plant materials are more expensive, but if you account for the true cost of petroleum-based plastics, then we're going to continue doing what we've been doing for the last 50 to 100 years. Yes, another question.
Who do you see as the best investors in climate tech? Is it more like financial VCs, or are you talking more strategic patient capital investors?
I don't think there's one answer to. I would say you. That would be. I don't.
This guy.
I'm Ben. No, but I don't think. I mean, so we've got two examples here, both engaged, knowledgeable, and far-sighted investors, which is mostly what you want. That knowledgeable, patient bit, and a good reason for doing it, knowing while you're doing it, is probably the most important thing. And beyond that, it's nice to have a mix. That's as much as I could say about that, I think. In my area, I do think that supply chain investment, what you might call strategic investment, is helpful because it tends to be a bit stickier, and it can go horribly wrong. I've seen that now. But it tends to be a bit stickier, and it comes with advantages in access to market and credibility. But yes, patient, knowledgeable, well-motivated investment, wherever it comes from, is the key.
I think anyone with the expectation of flipping a fintech company in 2 years would be disappointed, right? Investing in an infrastructure clean tech play.
Yeah, I've never got anything to market in less than 8 years.
Yeah.
But when you're there, it's great. It goes both ways. I think don't balk at 8 years and high barriers to entry, because if you do the 8 years, you get over the barriers. I started my career in an industry where a market was created by 3 companies, and 45 years later, those 3 companies still had 95% of the market.
Yeah.
Find me an example of that in some of the other areas we've been talking about.
That's right. So if you have the patience, there can be the rewards. It's just a longer game, but I think the rewards that we've talked about could be shared, across the globe. In fact, if we help to reduce carbon, if we help to make things more efficient. So, great. Well, thank you very much for the insights. Thank you, everyone.